Evelyn had always possessed a magnetic allure, a captivating presence that drew attention wherever she went. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed charged with an unspoken energy, a shift in the atmosphere that hinted at transformation, not just in how others perceived her, but in how she saw herself, and perhaps even her marriage. The evening began with effortless sophistication as she and William arrived at the party hosted by one of his college friends. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, the mingling scents of fine whiskey and expensive perfume creating an air of relaxed indulgence. William introduced Evelyn to his friends, his arm draped possessively around her waist, his voice warm yet tinged with subtle authority. Evelyn noticed how their gazes lingered on her, predatory, hungry, and a shiver ran down her spine. She was no stranger to such attention, but tonight it carried an edge, a primal undercurrent that stirred something deep within her. Then, with casual ease that masked the tension simmering beneath the surface, William made a remark that shifted the room's dynamic. "Evelyn could charm anyone here," he said, his tone light but laced with suggestion. A silent understanding passed among his friends, an unspoken challenge that hung heavy in the air. As the night wore on and the whiskey flowed freely, the atmosphere grew charged with dangerous energy. What began as innocent games took on a suggestive edge, the banter laced with double meanings that quickened Evelyn's pulse. She found herself at the center of their attention, their eyes tracing her every move as the room thrummed with anticipation. It started with a simple dare, a playful suggestion that she kiss someone other than her husband. Evelyn's heart raced as the air thickened with unspoken desires. When she glanced at William, she expected disapproval, but found instead a silent challenge, a tacit permission that emboldened her. The kiss was electric, a forbidden thrill that sent shockwaves through her as her lips met another's. In that charged moment, Evelyn felt something shift within her, a transgression that both unsettled and intrigued her. The kiss marked the beginning of a descent into uncharted territory. The glances grew bolder, the drinks flowed faster, and Evelyn felt her inhibitions begin to crumble. A heady rush of excitement coursed through her veins, fueled by the attention and the illicit nature of the game. Each dare pushed her further into forbidden realms of sensuality and transgression she had never dared to explore. William's gaze followed her every move, intense and unreadable, a mix of possessiveness, jealousy, and something darker she couldn't quite name. His silent observation seemed to fuel her audacity, urging her to push boundaries further. Under his watchful eye, Evelyn allowed herself to be drawn deeper into the game, each dare bolder than the last, each act laced with forbidden intimacy. The room crackled with tension, thick with unspoken desires. The men watched her every move with rapt attention, their comments growing more suggestive, their intentions clearer. One of William's friends dared her to sit on his lap. Evelyn hesitated briefly under William's heavy gaze, but then complied with a defiant tilt of her chin. As she settled onto the man's lap, she felt a ripple of excitement course through the room. His hands rested firmly on her hips, sending a shiver through her, a blend of fear and exhilaration. The other men's gazes followed her every motion, their words growing more explicit. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she grasped the unspoken agreement hanging in the air. A line had been crossed. The thrill of transgression was intoxicating. Emboldened by the charged atmosphere, Evelyn's actions grew bolder, her inhibitions melted away with each passing dare. She reveled in the attention, the power she held over these men, the forbidden desires she ignited within them. She was the center of their universe, the object of their collective desire, and it thrilled her. Throughout it all, William remained a silent observer, his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable yet tinged with dark satisfaction playing at the corners of his lips. It was as if he derived pleasure from her surrender to their game. The weight of his gaze and the unspoken tension between them fueled her audacity, pushing her further into this forbidden realm. Evelyn teetered on edge, torn between exhilaration and fear, but the allure proved too strong to resist as the night wore on. She surrendered completely, embracing the power and danger of transgression as she ventured deeper into shadows of desire. This was no longer a mere game. It was a descent into a dangerous dance on the precipice of no return. The tension thickened, palpable electricity crackled in the air. She knew whatever happened next would irrevocably alter the course of her life. It wasn't long after taking that first fateful step, kissing another man under William's watchful gaze, that the night spiraled further out of control. Emboldened by her compliance, his friends proposed new games that transcended playful dares and demanded intimate surrender. Their eyes gleamed with predatory hunger as they pressed for more. Evelyn felt a tumultuous mix of fear and excitement as her heart pounded fiercely against her ribs. The first dare seemed deceptively simple: unbutton her blouse. Such a small act, yet under their piercing gazes, stripping her bare with their eyes alone, it felt monumental. She hesitated briefly. Trembling fingers hovered over the buttons, as silence amplified the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat. William stood in the corner, his expression unreadable, but the darkness in his eyes betrayed his thoughts. He made no move to intervene, no word of protest. And so, Evelyn complied, one button at a time, exposing herself to their ravenous stares. Each undone button felt like a descent into a shadowy abyss of forbidden longing. When the final button gave way and her blouse fell open, the room seemed to pause, holding its breath in anticipation. The air thickened, charged with a tension that crackled like static before a storm. But this was only the beginning. Their focus sharpened on Evelyn, the dares growing bolder, more daring, more explicit. One of William's friends, the one with the confident smirk and piercing gaze, stepped forward, daring her to kiss him. It wasn't her first kiss under such circumstances, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a kiss, it was a surrender, an unspoken acknowledgement of the dangerous game they were playing. The kiss lingered, electric and undeniable. Evelyn felt a rush of exhilaration, a thrill born of defiance, of crossing lines she had once sworn to protect. The other men watched intently, their gazes searing into her, feeding off the forbidden spectacle unfolding before them. The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that seemed to coil tighter with every passing second. Then, like a dam bursting, the dares came faster, each one pushing Evelyn further into uncharted territory. Acts she had never imagined herself performing became reality as the men, emboldened by her compliance, took turns exploring her body with an audacity that left her breathless. Shame and excitement warred within her, a dangerous cocktail of fear and forbidden pleasure that both terrified and enthralled her. What unsettled her most was William's silence, his tacit approval of the escalating situation. He remained in the shadows, his gaze fixed on her as his friends took liberties with his wife. Yet he said nothing, a dark, brooding presence that fueled Evelyn's growing unease. It was his silence, his passive acceptance, that unraveled her more than any of the increasingly intimate dares. The game spiraled further. The men pushed boundaries, their demands escalating until Evelyn was asked to shed all pretense of modesty, to bare herself completely before their hungry eyes. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, urging her to resist, to reclaim her dignity. But a force stronger than reason, a potent mix of fear and forbidden desire, propelled her forward. With trembling hands she complied, her body exposed and vulnerable under their collective gaze. A wave of shame washed over her, yet beneath it surged a thrill, a dangerous exhilaration that both terrified and excited her. She could feel their eyes tracing every curve of her exposed form, devouring her as if she were nothing more than an object of their collective desire. She had become a prize in a twisted game, a pawn in a power play orchestrated by her husband. William's friends took their turns, each one pushing further, touches growing more intimate, more possessive. And through it all, William remained a silent observer, his gaze unwavering, a dark satisfaction lurking in his eyes. Evelyn's mind reeled as she tried to comprehend his motives, his silent complicity in her humiliation. Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't he pulling her out of this nightmare that had begun as a playful game? Then, with a clarity that cut through the haze of alcohol and arousal, the truth dawned on her. William was enjoying this. He reveled in her submission, in the degradation she endured at the hands of his friends. This was what he wanted, what he needed, to see her stripped of dignity and reduced to nothing more than an object of their collective desire. The realization shattered something within her, a fragile trust that had been the foundation of their relationship. This was no longer a game, it was a descent into darkness, a terrifying freefall into a world of twisted desires and power dynamics. The night was far from over, and Evelyn knew with sickening certainty that whatever lay ahead would forever alter the course of her life. There is a limit to how far one can be pushed, a boundary where the mind rebels against further degradation. But Evelyn had crossed that threshold long ago. Her will had crumbled under the weight of the night's transgressions. The games had morphed into something sinister, a perverse exploration of power and submission that went far beyond playful exploration. And it wasn't over yet. A heavy silence descended upon the room, thick with anticipation and dread. Then one of William's friends issued a dare that sent shockwaves through everyone present. He dared Evelyn to take him into her mouth. The vulgarity hung in the air like poison dripping from his lips, raw and primal. For a moment time seemed to stand still as all eyes turned to Evelyn, waiting for her response. She hesitated under the weight of this new demand. The violation was a more intimate surrender than anything Evelyn had experienced before. Her eyes flickered toward William, seeking a sign of disapproval, a flicker of protectiveness that might pull her back from the precipice. Instead, she received only a silent nod, a subtle encouragement that sealed her fate. William, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish and protect her, was granting permission for her further debasement. A wave of nausea washed over her, but it was quickly overtaken by a strange mix of shame and forbidden excitement. With trembling hands, Evelyn knelt before the man, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt their eyes on her, the weight of their collective gaze burning into her skin. The room held its breath, a silent audience to this act of degradation, a spectacle both sacred and profane. As she performed the act, the atmosphere shifted once more. The once light-hearted banter that had filled the room gave way to a heavy, primal tension crackling with unspoken desires. The men watched intently, their eyes gleaming with lust and possessive hunger, as they savored the control they wielded over her. One by one they took their turns. Evelyn became little more than a vessel for their collective cravings. Her mind drifted, detached from her body, as though she were an outsider observing her own unraveling. Thought became impossible, resistance unthinkable. There was only the raw immediacy of the moment and the reactions it drew from the men surrounding her. She clung to fragments of dignity, but with each man's turn, another piece of her resolve crumbled. Her sense of self began to dissolve, slipping into the depths of submission. With every passing moment, she felt further removed from the woman she had once been, the wife, the individual. In her place emerged something else, a creation of their making, a plaything to be used and discarded. The realization sent a shiver through her, a strange mix of thrill and dread. Their voices grew louder, their words crude and dehumanizing, stripping away what little remained of her identity. Evelyn was too far gone to protest, too lost in the intoxicating pull of submission to care. She had become an object, a tool for their amusement. And though the knowledge was degrading, it sparked a forbidden excitement within her. Her emotions churned in chaos, pleasure tangled with shame, desire clashed with disgust. She struggled to reconcile the conflicting sensations, the arousal that mingled with humiliation, the thrill that intertwined with degradation. How could she find pleasure in this, in being stripped of her humanity? Yet she did. The shame of that realization only deepened the experience, pulling her further into this forbidden world. William lingered in the background, a silent witness to his wife's descent. His expression was unreadable, a mask hiding the storm within. But Evelyn could sense the darkness in his gaze, a twisted satisfaction that chilled her to her core. This was what he had wanted all along, what he had orchestrated through his silence and subtle encouragement. His arousal was palpable, a fact that only heightened Evelyn's humiliation and sense of betrayal. Her heart raced as she realized she had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. The weight of that knowledge was crushing, yet there was a perverse thrill beneath the shame, a forbidden excitement she couldn't deny. She had entered a realm she never knew existed, one of submission and degradation that both terrified and exhilarated her. The darkness within her, the part she had always suppressed, was now unleashed. She found herself both repulsed and strangely aroused by her own powerlessness. The night stretched on in an endless cycle of submission and humiliation. William's friends took their turns, each pushing Evelyn further. Her body responded despite the turmoil in her mind and the shame gnawing at her soul. She was no longer in control, no longer the woman she had been just hours before. The Evelyn who had walked into the party was gone, replaced by a creature shaped by their desires. As the night deepened and Evelyn sank further into the abyss, she felt a strange detachment from her own body, as though she were watching from a distance. Shame and pleasure, fear and excitement swirled within her, a chaotic storm of emotions that defied reason. The realization struck like lightning. Boundaries had been irrevocably crossed. There was no turning back from this path they had chosen. Evelyn stumbled into the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her, a sound that echoed the finality of her transformation. The harsh fluorescent light illuminated her reflection in the mirror, a distorted image that barely resembled the woman she once knew. This wasn't the confident Evelyn who had entered the party. This was a stranger, a shadow of her former self. Her eyes were wide with shock and something darker lurking beneath. She searched her reflection for answers, for a trace of the woman she had been, but found only stark evidence of her unraveling. The phantom touch of their hands lingered on her skin, a haunting reminder of their violation. Their hungry gazes burned into her memory, mocking her submission. And William, her husband, the man who had vowed to protect and cherish her, had stood by as a silent accomplice to her humiliation. His tacit approval, his voyeurism, his arousal at her shame, she had willingly embraced it all. She splashed cold water on her face, a desperate attempt to cleanse herself, but no amount could wash away what had been done, or what she had become. Evelyn scrubbed at her skin, desperate to erase the lingering touch of those men, to wash away the shame that clung to her like a shroud. But it was futile. The water mingled with her tears, tracing paths down her cheeks, a physical manifestation of the turmoil raging within her. Those tears were proof of the irrevocable change she had undergone. There was no escaping the reality of her choices, no undoing what had brought her to this precipice. When she returned to the room, the atmosphere had grown heavier still. The air was thick with predatory hunger, threatening to consume her entirely. Their gazes, once cloaked in civility, now bore into her with raw intensity. They had tasted her submission, and they craved more. William remained silent in the corner, his eyes dark with approval. His arousal was unmistakable, a blatant display of his twisted desires. He reveled in her unraveling, his silence a damning endorsement of their depravity. Emboldened by her surrender, the men pushed further, shattering any pretense of decorum. What remained was raw, primal hunger. Their voices, laced with possessive entitlement, demanded more. Evelyn's mind went numb. Her body became a vessel for their desires. She complied with each command, each degrading act pulling her deeper into an abyss of shame and forbidden pleasure. She was a puppet, strings pulled by their insatiable lust, will dissolving into submission's haze. Then it began. William's friends vied for dominance over one another as much as over Evelyn herself, each driven by a perverse need to conquer what little remained unclaimed within this twisted game they played out together. On stage tonight, their twisted game escalated with each passing moment. To them, Evelyn was no longer a person, she was a prize to be claimed. Her humiliation fueled their pleasure, and though shame burned within her, her body betrayed her, responding with an arousal that both disgusted and thrilled her. Trapped in a cycle of degradation and desire, she couldn't break free from their intoxicating pull. One man, his voice dripping with predatory intent, suggested taking the game to a new level of violation. Evelyn's breath hitched as dread washed over her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. They led her toward the bedroom, a dark space that loomed like an altar of surrender. The bed seemed to wait for her, a symbol of the final sacrifice. As they guided her closer, a chilling premonition tightened its icy grip around her heart. Their eyes burned into her, stripping away the last shreds of dignity. Her resistance crumbled under their collective gaze. They took turns with her, each man pushing further, testing her limits, breaking down the walls she had built. She fought to maintain composure, but with each act of submission, she felt herself slipping away, losing herself in the abyss of their desires. Her mind spiraled in confusion and despair, her body moved to their rhythm, her will became a distant echo. And through it all, William watched from the doorway, his presence a looming shadow, his arousal a cruel reminder of his complicity. He reveled in her humiliation. His silence spoke volumes. Evelyn was no longer herself. She was lost, broken, a shell of the woman who had once possessed control. Her spirit was crushed beneath the weight of their collective violation. As the night wore on, grim reality settled upon her. There was no escape from this descent. The spiral of degradation had consumed her entirely, leaving her trapped, a prisoner of William's betrayal and his friend's insatiable desires. William stood by like a silent warden overseeing her demise, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction as she was consumed by darkness. The tension crackled like electricity as glances exchanged between predators signaled readiness among themselves, while hands reached out greedily toward prey whose body surrendered instinctively despite turmoil raging inside. Where thoughts fragmented incoherently amidst overwhelming sensations until realization dawned coldly clear, control relinquished entirely now beyond reclaiming forevermore. As the night wore on, their actions grew more aggressive, their demands more insistent, pushing Evelyn deeper into submission. Layer by layer they stripped away the last vestiges of identity. leaving emotions in turmoil, a nauseating blend of pleasure and despair, arousal and degradation. With each passing moment, her sense of self crumbled, leaving behind a hollow shell. Then William emerged from the shadows. His presence loomed over Evelyn like a predator closing in on its prey. He joined the fray. His touch was both familiar and disturbingly foreign in this context. A perverse relief washed over her, at least now she wasn't alone in degradation. Yet the realization that her husband was an active participant in humiliation only deepened despair threatening to consume her. The man who had vowed to love and protect had become an accomplice in downfall, a cruel twist irony knife twisting deeper still. As exhaustion replaced insatiable lust fueling depravity frenzy energy waned eventually leaving room only for grim aftermath settling heavily upon shoulders already burdened beyond capacity, while Evelyn lay marked violated, shattered landscape mind, unable comprehend full extent damage wrought upon soul, irrevocably altered course life forevermore. The room fell silent, the echoes of laughter and crude remarks fading as William's friends departed one by one, their smug expressions betraying a sense of triumph. The air felt heavier now, charged with the weight of what had transpired. William approached her, his eyes gleaming with a satisfaction that sent a chill down her spine. He surveyed the scene, his presence looming like a shadow over the wreckage he had orchestrated. Evelyn met his gaze, her heart sinking under the crushing realization that this night had changed everything. There was no going back. Her submission was absolute, her spirit fractured beyond repair. The darkness they had both stepped into now enveloped her completely. His smile crept across his face, slow, deliberate, and laced with cruelty. It was a twisted reflection of the love they had once shared, now distorted beyond recognition. He had won, and Evelyn knew it. Their relationship would never recover. She was his now, bound to him in ways she couldn't fully comprehend, a possession to be wielded or cast aside as he pleased. The truth settled over her like a suffocating shroud, extinguishing the last flickers of who she once was. This was her reality now, forged in the fire of that night's choices, a reality from which there was no escape.